Not, they think the jury reached the right verdict. The couple said that they had been lied to so much that they wanted to hear the evidence for themselves in court. Quote, after seeing all the evidence as it was presented,
Friends,
we believe that the
when a big celebrity or a high-profile person goes to court, federal judges and investigators usually don't care about media headlines, TV fame, or reality show popularity. They focus on only one thing: the digital footprint. And today, I've brought you a shocking inside update on the Joseph Duggar case that honestly might leave you stunned. Because think about it for a second. When investigators claim they tracked Joseph's digital footprint, every online move, step by step, is there really any way left to fight that in court? Are Joseph's lawyers simply helpless against this kind of technical evidence? Or is there still a hidden truth behind the scenes, something only the judge knows right now? In today's video, I'm going to show you exclusive inside details about digital tracking and investigation, details you probably haven't heard anywhere else. So don't skip this video, friends. Watch till the very end. Because if you miss the twist in the middle, you might miss the real trick behind this entire legal battle. And tell me in the comments, what do you think about this digital footprint evidence, and Joseph's difficult legal fight? Do you think the evidence is simply too strong this time? If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and now, let's uncover the real mystery of this digital world together. The Duggar family case has become one of the most talked about legal stories connected to reality TV in recent years. But what's really surprising now is how much of the court's reasoning relied on legal precedents that existed long before the family ever became famous. The federal court system treated this less like a celebrity scandal, and more like a technical forensic investigation. And honestly, I think that surprised a lot of people watching from the outside. For many viewers, especially reality TV fans, the emotional side of the story felt overwhelming. The public reaction was intense. Online debates exploded everywhere. But inside federal court, emotions matter very little compared to documented evidence and legal procedure. And honestly, that's the real heart of this story. The prosecution's case relied heavily on digital forensics. And if you've never seen how federal investigators handle computer evidence before, it can almost feel unreal. Investigators don't just find files on a computer. They analyze timestamps, internet activity, partitioned hard drives, downloaded software, device usage patterns, IP logs, metadata, password activity, even how files were moved within a system. Federal digital forensic teams are trained to document everything, step by step. And why is that important? Because once evidence is presented properly in court, it becomes extremely difficult for a defense team to argue that the data just appeared there without human involvement. Federal prosecutors usually build these cases in layers. One piece of evidence alone might not seem huge. But together, all these digital clues create a timeline that jurors can easily follow. And that's interesting, because most public discussions focused almost entirely on personalities and family reputation. While the real legal arguments became highly technical, one major issue discussed during the trial and appeals was something called chain of custody. Now, this phrase gets mentioned a lot in criminal cases, but many people still don't fully understand what it means. Basically, chain of custody means documenting who handled the evidence, when they handled it, where it was stored, and whether it was changed in any way. In federal cases, investigators are trained to maintain extremely strict records when collecting digital evidence. For example, if agents seize a computer, they create logs showing exactly when the device was collected, who transported it, where it was stored, and how forensic copies were created. And often, investigators use special software tools to create an exact forensic image of the hard drive, while keeping the original data untouched. So why does that matter? Because defense teams often try to raise doubts about evidence contamination or unauthorized access. If the chain of custody is weak, jurors may question whether evidence was tampered with. But when the government presents detailed forensic documentation, those arguments become much harder to sustain. And honestly, I think that's why many federal digital evidence appeals face an uphill battle right from the beginning. Another important issue involves legal precedents surrounding search warrants and forensic examinations. Federal courts have repeatedly ruled that properly collected digital evidence can be admissible, even when investigators use highly technical methods. Courts also tend to rely heavily on trained forensic experts, unless the defense can prove a major procedural failure. And that becomes a huge obstacle. Because in many federal cases, judges don't ask whether the defendant is famous, controversial, or disliked by the public. They ask whether investigators followed constitutional procedures, and whether the evidence meets the legal standard of proof. That distinction is extremely important. Some people online seem to believe celebrity status could somehow influence the outcome of the case. But federal courts usually operate in a very structured, almost emotionless way. Judges rely on precedent. They compare current cases with previous rulings. And unless there's a serious legal mistake, appellate courts often avoid overturning earlier decisions. What's especially interesting here is how much digital evidence law has evolved over the last 20 years. Older criminal cases relied heavily on eyewitness testimony or physical evidence alone. But today, digital evidence often becomes the centerpiece of the entire case. And courts are increasingly treating digital footprints almost like silent witnesses. The appeal process also became a huge topic online. Some supporters believed the defense strategy would eventually overturn the conviction. Others felt the appeal had a much lower chance of success, because appellate courts usually focus more on legal mistakes than re-arguing the facts of the case. And this is a very important distinction that many people misunderstand. The purpose of an appeal usually isn't asking, what actually happened? Instead, it asks, did the trial court apply the law correctly? And why does that matter? Because even strong emotional disagreement with a verdict does not automatically create grounds to overturn it. Appeal judges usually look for procedural mistakes, constitutional violations, improper jury instructions, or evidentiary errors serious enough to affect the outcome. And in federal court, that standard can be extremely difficult to meet. Honestly, I think that's why some legal analysts believe parts of the defense strategy were focused more on limiting reputational damage, rather than securing a complete legal victory. And maybe that sounds harsh. But in high-profile public cases, there are often two different battles happening at the same time. One battle happens inside the courtroom. The other happens in public opinion. The Duggars have been surrounded by media attention for years, long before this case even started. So every motion, every hearing, every appeal, instantly became public discussion online. And that creates pressure not only legally, but socially too. What's interesting is that the legal system itself often seems almost completely disconnected from all that outside noise. Federal judges rarely react publicly to public opinion. Court rulings are usually written in dry, technical language. They focus on the law, previous cases, standards of proof, and constitutional principles. To the public, these stories feel emotional and dramatic. I see. But to the courts, many of these cases become procedural and structural questions. And honestly, that disconnect may be one reason why many people were surprised by how straightforward some of the rulings appeared. Another topic people discussed heavily was forensic testimony. Digital forensic experts often explain evidence to jurors using very simple language. They explain how software works, how passwords were used, or how investigators connected activity patterns to specific users. And why does that feel convincing? Because juries usually respond strongly to evidence that appears measurable and trackable. Digital timelines can create a narrative that feels more concrete than conflicting verbal testimony. And to be honest, modern true crime culture has made audiences far more familiar with forensic concepts than ever before. People now recognize terms like metadata, IP addresses, browser history, encrypted partitions, and forensic imaging. But many still underestimate how common these investigative methods have become in federal court. This case was never only a reality TV story. It became a real example of how modern federal litigation now depends heavily on technology, procedure, and legal precedent. Of course, public opinion still remains divided. Some people continue debating whether the ruling was fair. Others believe the courts handled the case according to the law. And years later, debates still continue online, largely because the Duggar family name continues to attract public attention. But when you step back from the celebrity angle, the biggest lesson may actually be how emotionless the federal system can feel. A courtroom does not work like social media. It runs on documents, precedent, procedure, and standards of proof developed over decades. And honestly, I think that's why this case became so significant. It exposed the difference between public debate and federal legal reality. One side runs on emotion and opinion. The other runs on procedure and demonstrable evidence. And whether people agree with the outcome or not, this case makes one thing very clear. In modern federal courts, digital footprints often speak louder than public opinion.